Hey YouTube, what's up? It's your boy Rudy, here to bring you guys a new video. Today's video, I couldn't be more excited about. This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to do a bike review video. That's right, we're doing a bike review video today on the channel. Stick with me, let's get to it. Let's get to know this giant Trance 329er, starting with components that are all Giant's own house brand components, such as the stem, the bars, the grips, the rims, the hubs, the dropper seat post. What else? The seat. I think that's it. Oh, the lever. All of those components are all Giant's house brand component. That's okay though, mainly because with all of those components being all Giant's house brand, it was allow them the opportunity to be able to put really good suspension components on this bike. For example, up front they have a Marzocchi Z2 bomber with the grip damper. They put a Fox Float DPS for the rear shock to help control that 115 millimeters of travel. Next, they put some amazing tires on this bike. They went with the DHF2 DHR combo. So that should really tell you in itself what this bike should be capable of. I would categorize this bike personally as more of a down country bike. If you're coming from something like a cross country bike and you want something that's a little bit more capable, but you still want to can maintain that speed on the nice floorier trails, maybe get a little rougher, this bike is definitely going to be geared towards you. Okay, let's get into the bike setup real quick. It was really easy. I set the shock up at 25% in the rear and 30% on the front fork. I put the tires at 24 pounds in the rear and 23 pounds in the front. That seemed to work really good through all the trails that I went through. And with that shock, I pretty much left it in either the open or the trail set. I did try it with the climbing. It works fine. It obviously stiffens up the rear end, but the way this bike pedals, really didn't need it. Let's get to know this Giant Trance 329er. Starting with the colors this bike comes in. It comes in a neon red, matte metallic black, beige sand, which that's the color that we're going to be showing you most of today. And then also it comes in just a gloss black color. 3 colors for this bike, that's pretty good. A lot of times whenever you get scaled down this far into the beginner of the bike brands, they usually only come out with 1 color. So that's pretty nice that there are 3 different colors for this bike. Next, the frame is Aluxx, A-L-U-X-X. That's the aluminum that Giant uses to build this bike. It has 115 millimeters of travel, like I mentioned before. The fork, once again, we're talking about the Marzocchi Z2 bomber with the grip damper. Everything is boost front and rear. The shock, as I mentioned before, also is the Fox Float DPS Performance, which has the switch for the, close, trail, and open. Also, like I mentioned before, the handlebars, they are Giant's own contacted brand. The TR35, they come out at 780 mil, 35 millimeter clamp. The stems also Giant's house brand. That is 40 millimeter stem, 35 millimeter clamp. The seat and the seat post are also Giant's own house brand. The drivetrain is powered by SRAM's full SX group set, which worked amazing. So we're talking the derailleur, the cassette, the front chainring, the cranks, and the shifter, all SRAM SX. This was the first time that I was able to ride an SX bike that did not have an issue. Didn't have to re-index the gears. Everything worked flawlessly. I actually really enjoyed riding this bike with the SX group set. Talk about the brakes real quick. We're talking about Shimano MT410s. They are single piston brakes front and rear. Moving down to the rims, they are Giant's XTC 29er, tubeless ready, 25 millimeter internal width rims. Pretty narrow if you ask me for my kind of riding. The hubs are also house brand Giant. They are their tracker hubs. Point of engagement, not that great, but for this price point, what do you expect? And wrapped up around those rims, we're talking about the Minion DHF front, DHR2 in the rear with trail casing. Worked amazing. Love those tires. Love that tire combo setup. Rear tire maybe a little slow, but they were set up with size 2.3, which worked really well on this bike. Okay, just real quick, let's glance at some of the tech features that this bike has to offer, starting with Giant's own Alua X SL. That's basically the aluminum that they use. I believe it is a 60 to 61 alloy that delivers what they think is best in class strength to weight ratio. Next up is the advanced forged composite technology, which is basically the only part of composite or carbon fiber. That's the swing arm, the Maestro setup, which works excellent, but that helps keep the weight of the bike down because that would be a huge chunk of aluminum. So that's what they use to make the Maestro arm link. And since we're on the talk of the Maestro, that is a big part of what makes this bike great. That Maestro suspension system that they have, 4 strategically placed pivot points and 2 linkages that work all together to create a single floating pivot for the most effective and advanced independent suspension system on the trail. Now here's one thing that I really want to mention to you guys that I didn't want to overlook whenever we're talking about the advanced technology that Giant has. That's their overdrive system. They put a 1.5 inch upper bearing and then a 1 1/8 bearing on the bottom. Giant oversizes the steer tube. That really helps to optimize the stiffness in the steering. And I gotta say, whenever I rode this bike, I didn't look into it too much, but I could tell right away that there was something special with the steering. Now that I know what they've done, it definitely makes a difference. Real quick, I just want to glance at some of the geometry numbers. The head tube angle on this medium is a 66.5. The reach is 442. The wheelbase is 1176. The fork rake is 44. And the seat tube angle is 74.5. Let's talk about how this bike did on the climb. This bike climbed amazing. This bike was one of the first bikes that I ever felt that it made me want to try to tackle some of the climbs. A lot of times I'll come up to a climb that looks difficult and I'll just get off and walk it because I simply don't want to put in the effort to do it. But after pedaling this bike around for a little bit, it made me want to try to tackle some of those harder things because the pedal efficiency was so well and it climbed up everything. And the position that it puts you in, seated or out of the seat, to lift that front end, maybe to get over some obstacles, it was great. The 29-inch wheels, also awesome for climbing over some of those big technical obstacles that were on the course. I did try the suspension locked out. Not that it really needed it, but on long, like fire roads or gravel climbs, it worked really, really well. But whenever you had more technical stuff, you definitely wanted to leave that thing in either open or the trail mode. Descending on this bike was absolutely amazing. It was way better than I expected it to be for a 29er with 115 millimeters of travel. The rear end, very few times the rear end felt like maybe I was doing too much, because I think maybe between my weight, maybe it could have used a token, because whenever it got down to the bottom of its travel, that back end did feel a little nervous. But again, through the entire time that I had this bike and all the trails that I took it on, there was very few times where I actually felt that. But I think adding a token or maybe a wider rim, or maybe a 2.4 rather than a 2.3, maybe that would combat that issue. But the bike, it gives you a lot of confidence, especially if you're somebody that is just coming off of like a hardtail, or maybe you're trying to get a little bit faster on your downhills. This bike will definitely do that for you. It has a lot of confidence, and you feel centered in the bike. You don't feel like you need to hang off the back of it or be over the front of it. the bike handles really well, and cornering on this bike was absolutely amazing. There were several times on flat turns where I felt like I was going into the turn too much, so I would take my foot off and try to put it down, and the bike would just stay hooked up and straight, and or hooked up and leaned over. Like, the bike loved to be leaned over. I had a blast, a serious blast riding this bike. I could not recommend this bike more to anybody out there that's looking for either this style of a bike, or maybe they're just getting into mountain biking. Like, this bike is going to progress you, and it's going to be a while before you outgrow it. Components. Let's talk about the components of the bike. For the most part, I have nothing bad at all to say about any of the components. If I were to say that this thing had a weak spot, it would probably be the brakes. The brakes that they put on these, the MT410s, although they had good power, because they had resin pads and resin rotors, whenever you were in high-speed situations and you wanted to slow down fast, they really didn't have much of a bite. I think if somebody would change those rotors so that you could get metallic pads, that would definitely help a lot. If there was something that I was going to upgrade, the first thing I would do is probably upgrade the brakes. I would go to a 4-piston brake. But of course, I'm a bigger guy. I ride a little bit more aggressive. Everything else worked really, really well. I really enjoyed the SRAM SX components. Didn't have a single problem with those at all. I was very impressed with the Marzocchi Z2. It's my first time riding one. I had it at about 3/4 of the way from open. And I pretty much rode it like that no matter what. I was really impressed, and I think for my next bike, I would really like to try the Z1 or the Z2, depending on what size of bike I go with, because I felt that actually had really, really good performance, especially for the price point of that shock. The dropper and the dropper lever, amazing. They work great. I have a 1-up dropper and 1-up dropper lever on my Bronson, and I felt this worked as good, for sure, as good, at least as good, and very reliable. I loved it. The seat, I actually got along with the seat really well. The only thing I can talk bad about is, like I said, maybe the brakes. I would upgrade the brakes right away. Oh, they did put a 25mm with rim. Me personally, I think a 29mm or 30mm with rim would really have brought this bike alive and made it even that much faster. And if you look now at the 2020 version or the 2021 versions, they actually did do that. They stepped up to a 29mm with rim, and I bet that combats some of the rear end feeling a little nervous at times whenever you're deep into travel and maybe coming out of a G out or something like that. That's really about it with the components, man. I really enjoyed all of them. Pros and cons. First off, let's talk about the pros of the bike. And there are many. The tires. The Maxxis DHF front, DHR rear. Freaking amazing tire combo. The Maestro system, the Z2, the DPS shock. I mean, just everything was just absolutely amazing about that. The bike handled really well. 115mm of travel. I mean, I don't know what else you can expect out of this kind of a bike. Like, it was a really, really good bike, and it had a lot of really, really good things about it. And light. The bike is light. Like, I wish I weighed the bike. I did not weigh the bike, but I bet the bike's probably around 33, 34 pounds for a beginner bike. And I just don't know what else you can ask for out of that bike. Cons. Let's talk about the cons. There are very, very few. First, the grips. Those slip-on grips that I had to roll off, they were uncomfortable. They were very stiff. The material that they use, or the rubber compound that they use, was absolutely garbage. Took those off right away. Put some good lock-on grips. World of difference. Brakes, like I said, I really wish they would have put metallic pads with metallic rotors. that would have gave the bike a lot better bite, or maybe upgraded the bikes to just maybe the next step up in the Shimano's lineup. The hubs, of course, but at this price point, I don't know what else you can expect. The points of engagement weren't that great. And last but not least, I would say the width of the rims. They were 25 millimeter internal. On a bike that was so capable of doing everything else, I really think a 29 or 30 millimeter internal rim width would have been the way to go there, but it did everything that I needed it to do. Who's this bike for? Who's this bike for? A beginner, for sure. A beginner that really values his money and isn't maybe so sure on how deep into the sport he's going to get, because this bike is really going to do a lot of the things, and it's going to do a lot of the things really, really well. If you're used to a cross-country bike, like a cross-country hardtail style of a bike, and you're wanting to get maybe a little bit more loose and get into some maybe a little bit more of the gnarlier, not so much flowy flat trails, this bike's definitely going to be for you. If you have a large enduro bike that you really enjoy taking down some big gnarly stuff, but maybe some of the trails that are closer to home aren't so gnarly and you have to stay in town and you need a bike to try to tackle those kind of things, that's me. That's exactly my situation. And that's why I would keep a short travel 29er bike in my lineup, because I really enjoy the enduro kind of riding, but I have to travel an hour or two to get to that kind of good riding. But here inside of San Antonio, this 115, 120 millimeter travel bike is going to shred anything that is locally. That bike's for you or me. How should this bike be ridden and where? The bike should be ridden as hard as you can push it. Like, with that tire combination and the suspension combination that this bike has, like, I know, like, it's gonna, like I said before, it's gonna do all the things, and it's gonna do all the things pretty well. Whenever you get into like the bigger jumps and the bigger drops and things like that, then yeah, you're obviously gonna be outbiked, but it's gonna be a long time if you're a beginner rider before you get your skill level up to those kind of things. And even then, if you get a wider rim, a wider tire, maybe you get a token or two, put it in that rear suspension, maybe you up the travel on your fork, maybe 10 mil. I mean, like, there's a lot of things that you can do to this bike before you're going to outgrow its skill level for you. I think this bike is definitely more flow trail orientated. Like, the bike's gonna come alive. You're gonna have so much fun. You're gonna be able to go so much faster and carry so much more speed than you could on a small wheeled like XC bike or something like that. This bike is going to be a lot of fun on a lot of the trails until you get into the really steep and rocky stuff. That's where this bike will probably be outbiked. But with that being said, guys, this is the end of the video. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you to all my subscribers. If you guys get a chance, please give me a thumbs up. Leave me some comments down below, maybe what kind of bike you'd like to see me test next. And peace out. Go ride your bike.